Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG show for Friday, November the 19th, 2021. So we all know what I'm going to talk about first. That would be Kyle Rittenhouse. So what does President Brandon have to think about the verdict? Well, he tweeted, let's go to the full statement. While the verdict in Kenosha will leave many Americans feeling angry and concerned, myself included, we must acknowledge that the jury has spoken. I ran on a promise to bring Americans together. Ho, ho, very satirical. Because I believe that what unites us is far greater than what divides us. No, you don't. You're lying. I know that we're not going to heal our country's wounds overnight, but I remain steadfast in my commitment to do everything in my power to ensure that every American is treated equally with fairness and dignity under the law. So we're going to expect President Brandon to move immediately to abolish affirmative action, are we? He concludes, I urge everyone to express their views peacefully, consistent with the rule of law. Violence and destruction of property have no place in our democracy. That's funny. That's not what you said on the second day of the Kenosha riots. You said something rather different. The White House and federal authorities have been in contact with Governor Evers' office to prepare for any outcome in this case, and I've spoken with the governor this afternoon and offered support and my assistance needed to ensure public safety. Looks quiet in Kenosha. I was looking at a live feed a few minutes ago, and I expected to be quiet because the sun went down half an hour ago there, and it is currently 34 degrees Fahrenheit, and with the wind chill, it feels like 28 degrees. Too cold for protesting and rioting. Let's see what Wisconsin Senator, lesbian Tammy Baldwin has to say. Here are the facts that are important to me. Kyle Rittenhouse, who was a minor at the time, traveled from Illinois to Wisconsin and picked up an assault rifle that was illegally purchased for him. Why wasn't he charged with that then? He took the law into his own hands, killing 2 people and injuring another. They were victims of gun violence, and too many families have lost loved ones. Yes, too many families have lost career criminals and pedophiles to these tragedies. I understand why people believe that justice was not served in this case, because I feel the same way. This ruling makes clear that we have so much to do to take on gun violence and reform our broken criminal justice system so that it starts working equally and fairly for everyone. The fact that some people are cheering a ruling that has allowed someone to take the law into his own hands and walk free from any accountability after shooting and killing 2 people is disrespectful to the lives that were lost. Pedophile lives matter. And I'm deeply concerned that it will encourage more tragic gun violence from those like Kyle Rittenhouse, who think they have a license to take the law into their own hands in a violent way. Okay. So that is the verdict from authority. Let's go to America's newspaper of records. Kyle Rittenhouse found not guilty of homicide and other charges. Room 209, the Kenosha courtroom where a jury found Kyle Rittenhouse not guilty just 3 hours ago in front of a dozen packed benches, is now completely empty. All that remains on the defense table are several microphones and a box of tissues. The decision to put Rittenhouse on the stand wasn't a close call, his lawyer said. This would be lead lawyer Mark Richards. On the witness stand, Rittenhouse, 18, described at times through sobs and gulps for air the moments before he shot 3 men, 2 fatally, in Kenosha on the night of August 25th, 2020, in the aftermath of turbulent demonstrations in the city over police violence and racial justice. Turbulent. Oh, okay. The emotional testimony was a pivotal moment in the trial, which ended on Friday in acquittal on all 5 felony counts, including first-degree intentional homicide. At certain points, we wondered whether we would put him on, Richards said after leaving the courthouse Friday. The defense team tested the idea, he said, by presenting the case to 2 mock juries before the trial, one with Rittenhouse taking the witness stand and one without. It was substantially better with him testifying, I mean, to a marked degree, Richards said, and that sealed it. Richards defended Rittenhouse against accusations by some detractors that the tears that he shed during his testimony were an act put on to win the jury's sympathy. Lawyers for the estate of Joseph Rosenbaum, he has an estate, does he, whom Kyle Rittenhouse killed, and Gage Grosskreutz, whom he wounded, released a statement calling for peace after the verdict. What we need now is justice, not more violence. While today's verdict may mean justice delayed, it will not mean justice denied. Jennifer Medina reports, conservatives celebrate Rittenhouse's acquittal as liberals lament the verdict. The swift reactions within the first few minutes of the verdict Friday spanned the political spectrum, with statements coming from gun rights and gun control advocates, Black Lives Matter activists, far-right talk show hosts, boo, and elected officials at all levels. Governor Tony Evers of Wisconsin, a Democrat, simply kept his tone conciliatory, saying that no verdict will be able to bring back the lives of Anthony Huber and Joseph Rosenbaum or heal Gage Grosskreuz's injuries, just as no verdict can heal the wounds or trauma experienced by Jacob Blake and his family. You notice that no one is really talking about why Jacob Blake was shot, what he was doing at the time, attempting, amongst other things, to kidnap a child. Evers acknowledged that the inevitable spotlight shining on the state again, which he said undoubtedly reopened wounds that have not yet fully healed. But other Democrats were far more pointed. In a tweet moments after the verdict, Governor Gavin Newsom of California said the verdict sent an alarming message to vigilantes. America today, you can break the law, carry around weapons built for a military, shoot and kill people and get away with it. That's the message we've just sent to armed vigilantes across the nation. Question, does Governor Newsom have a protective detail? Is it armed? I suspect that it is. But I still have to be disarmed now because these weapons are built for a military. Rebecca Kleefisch, a Republican candidate for governor of Wisconsin, praised the verdict. She said, our justice system worked today. The prosecution of the Kyle Rittenhouse trial was a complete disgrace, praising the mob who burned our streets as heroes. Josh Horwitz, the executive director of the Educational Fund to Stop Gun Violence, said the verdict denied justice. After the verdict, Tommy Lauren, a Fox host, said it was a sign of a larger shift. This is bigger than Kyle Rittenhouse. This is where the tide starts to change. The decent people of this country are tired of allowing it to be destroyed by thugs and miscreants. Your time is up. Theodore Thomas Binger, the lead prosecutor, said in response to the not guilty decision, quote, the jury representing our community has rendered its verdict in the Kyle Rittenhouse case. While we are disappointed with the verdict, it must be respected. We are grateful to the members of the jury for their diligent and thoughtful deliberations. And let's move on from there. Let's see what Legal Insurrection has to say. Well, at the top, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty, not guilty. Andrew Branca comments, the state never had anything even close to disproving self-defense beyond a reasonable doubt. No case that a reasonable jury could possibly convict on. And despite that, they brutalized this poor kid for a second time in this trial after the initial series of murderous attacks on Kyle Rittenhouse. For the last 14 months, not only did Kyle have to deal with the PTSD of the physical attacks he miraculously survived the night of August 25th, 2020, he had to worry whether this trial would end in a life sentence plus 5 years with a possibility of early release. Then add in the contemptible conduct of the prosecution in preparing for and arguing this trial with misrepresented evidence, mid-trial evidentiary gifts from the evidence fairy, and outright misrepresentations of the law. And from the perspective of this small-town lawyer, the entire affair was a legal horror show. Then, after both parties had rested and a fair and impartial jury ought to have returned verdicts of not guilty in the morning of the first day of deliberations, the defendant had to suffer through 4 days of uncertainty until the justice finally delivered midday on the fourth day. We can only thank God that the jury ultimately delivered to Kyle Rittenhouse the justice and acquittals he so richly deserved. Someone called Stephen Holder, who is a senior writer for The Atlantic. Oh, and he is a fan of the NFL's Colts. Okay. Miami native, in search of palm trees in cornfields, first generation American. Whatever you think about the verdict, this is sickening, he said. And if you go to Twitter and look under sickening, you will find many, many people. This seems to be the word of the day on the left. Andrew Cuomo, excuse me, or should I say disgraced former Governor Andrew Cuomo of New York, put his oar in. Today's verdict is a stain on the soul of America and sends a dangerous message about who and what values our justice system was designed to protect. We stand united in rejecting supremacist vigilantism and with one voice say, this is not who we are. Oh, the values our justice system protects. You mean like, say, a governor who sends many thousands of people in to old age homes riddled with COVID-19, with the result that many thousands died thereby? I don't see anyone prosecuting Andrew Cuomo for murder or manslaughter or something in between. No, 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 no. Politicians, well, Democratic politicians, they can get away with anything. But it was sweet, sweet, sweet reading the wails of the righteous today. Bill de Blasio, who still is mayor of New York, Anthony Huber and Joseph Rosenbaum are victims. They should be alive today. The only reason they're not is because a violent, dangerous man chose to take a gun across state lines and start shooting people. To call this a miscarriage of justice is an understatement. This clown de Blasio doesn't seem to have educated himself to the fact that the gun didn't cross state lines. They keep using this state lines phrase. Ooh, state lines, as if Rittenhouse were charged with violating the Mann Act. It's funny that the dignity of state lines is so important to them, whereas the dignity or even the importance or even the existence of national boundaries, such as the boundary between the United States and Mexico, is something that they don't care about. Build bridges, not borders, they say. Oh, and what does Hollywood have to say? Rosanna Arquette, who is always there in stories of this kind. I want to live in a country where Colin Kaepernick is seen as a hero and Kyle Rittenhouse is seen as a terrorist. LeVar Burton, golly, I used to like him. I want to live in a country where Colin Kaepernick is seen as a hero and Kyle Rittenhouse is seen as a terrorist. Do you think a memo went out? Morgan Freeman said, wait for it. I want to live in a country where Colin Kaepernick is seen as a hero and Kyle Rittenhouse is seen as a terrorist. George Takei, a famous homosexual who appeared in a television series 60 years ago, he tweeted, I want to live in a country where Colin Kaepernick is seen as a hero and Kyle Rittenhouse is seen as a terrorist. Mark Lamont Hill, who was something or other, said, I want to live in a country where Colin Kaepernick is seen as a hero and Kyle Rittenhouse is seen as a terrorist. Mohammed Sufa, Rex Chapman, and John Cooper said the same thing. Yes. And who else do we have? Anastasia Fennick. Who on earth is that? Oh, let's see. Lesbian, Antifa, etc., etc. Trans, BDS, BLM, Never Again, Reparations Now. Oh, she researches hate and extremism and genocide, and her pronouns are she and her. I wonder what she would have to say. Can anyone guess what she would have to say? The white supremacist system of power makes it clear that white people can avoid any legal consequences, and that if an active shooter is murdering people, you would be in the wrong if you tried to stop them. Vigilante and white supremacist murder have just been legalized. Joanne Reed, the stupidest woman in America, well, certainly the stupidest woman in America on TV, tweeted, "We knew, but it's sometimes helpful to remind ourselves how America was designed to work. It continues to work as designed. We have learned again what is considered legal for some people to do in America. It's helpful to know where you stand in your country. Be safe out there." I suppose her parents, neither of whom are from the United States, I guess they didn't know how America was designed to work, or they wouldn't have left their African paradises to come to America. Ida Bay Wells says, but Trayvon Martin deserved to die because he fought back against an aggressor with no weapon. This is the legacy of white supremacy in action. And no one was ever killed or seriously injured with fists, because that has never happened. Oh, in this country, you can even kill white people and get away with it if those white people are fighting for Black lives. This is the legacy of 1619. Jeff Tiedrich tweeted, "It's lucky for Kyle Rittenhouse that he was just a bloodthirsty white teenager," here we go, "crossing state lines to literally commit murder, and not, for example, a black man selling loose cigarettes on a street corner, because there are serious consequences for that." Patti LuPone, who was an actress, said the Rittenhouse verdict gives them permission to kill. I've lost the definition of right and wrong. So sad, so very sad. Washington Post columnist Eugene Robinson implies there will be more deadly incidents like this, saying the Kyle Rittenhouse verdict was a vindication of vigilantism and, wait for it, driving across state lines, carrying a military-style assault weapon to threaten people. You moron. The gun didn't cross state lines. And much. Oh, Roxane Gay, who is famous for being enormously fat. That's what she's famous for, being enormously fat. She wrote a autobiography called Hungry. She tweeted, "I knew Rittenhouse would be acquitted, but it is gutting." Ooh, awkward word choice there. "To witness the inevitable, to know there will be no consequences for the judge, and to know Rittenhouse and others like him will be more emboldened to be openly white supremacist vigilantes. It's hollowing." Again, awkward word choice there, Roxane. Okay. Oh, and Ana Navarra Cardenas, who is a proud Nicaraguan, said, "Stark reminder of inequity. Rittenhouse killed 2 men with an AR-15, found not guilty. Tamir Rice was shot by police for having a toy gun. Christopher Belter raped 4 girls, given no jail time. 2 men were exonerated after serving decades for Malcolm X murder they did not commit." I talked about the Christopher Belter case yesterday or the day before. One cannot extrapolate general principles from any one verdict. Again, we all know who ordered the execution of Malcolm X, but I guess we don't want to talk about that. And who else do we have here? Oh, I'm going to be talking about David Brooks, and that's going to be fun, because David Brooks is he's America's moral arbiter. Is he not? Is he not? Let's see what my hero Pat Buchanan has to say in his syndicated column. "In judging the actions of Kyle Rittenhouse, set aside for the moment Wisconsin law under which he is being tried, and consider the natural law, the moral law, the higher law written on the human heart. In terms of values demonstrated in the deeds done that night that Rittenhouse shot the 3 men who attacked him, who was on the righteous side? Consider what Rittenhouse did that night of August 25th, 2020, and why. Watching on television the nightly riots in Kenosha, Wisconsin, a town 20 miles from his home in Antioch, Illinois, that he knew well, Rittenhouse decided to go to Kenosha to protect property that embattled police had been unable to defend during the riots. For protection, he picked up the AR-15 that he kept in Kenosha. Toward midnight, Rittenhouse was confronted by Joseph Rosenbaum, an ex-con twice his age. Rosenbaum threatened Rittenhouse, backed him into a corner, and tried to grab the barrel of his rifle. When a shot rang out nearby, Rittenhouse shot 4 times within a single second. When Rosenbaum fell, Rittenhouse took off running, looking for the police to turn himself in, with a mob in hot pursuit. Out of that mob, an assailant hit him in the head, knocking his hat off. Rittenhouse fell on the street. Another rioter jumped and stomped his head on the concrete pavement. Another hit him in the head with a skateboard. Another man confronted him with a loaded pistol and aimed it at Rittenhouse's face from a few feet away. Rittenhouse shot and killed Anthony Huber, who had hit him with the skateboard and was grabbing his gun barrel, and wounded the man holding the gun to his face. When Rittenhouse shot both men, he was still on the ground. While Rittenhouse's decision to go to Kenosha may have been unwise, it was also unselfish and indeed brave. He was risking his life in a riot to defend another man's property and do his civic duty in a situation of lawlessness. He could have stayed home, as almost everyone in Kenosha did that night, while their city was burned and pillaged. And what were the motives and goals of Joseph Rosenbaum, the child rapist and ex-con, and Anthony Huber, who wielded the skateboard? What they were doing in Kenosha, if not helping to sustain a criminal riot to destroy property Rittenhouse had come to defend? Why was he there? I have no answer. I ask myself that question every day, said Rosenbaum's fiancée about that night. Again, whenever one thinks of Rittenhouse as entering a volatile situation, he emerges as one of the good guys. His actions were taken for commendable goals, whereas his assailants' purposes were to engage in a criminal rampage and riot. This is why Rittenhouse is being so fiercely defended. People sense that whatever he did, the 17-year-old went to Kenosha to do the right thing. Those who believe the Black Lives Matter Antifa riots were justified are the ones who want Rittenhouse to spend the rest of his life in prison for shooting rioters who were threatening and attacking him for interfering with their crimes. Sensing Rittenhouse as the country behind him, media efforts have been mounted to find a racial element in Rittenhouse's motivation. President Joe Biden implied that the Kenosha shootings were the work of white supremacists. The president's statement was as ignorant as it was malicious. Rittenhouse is white. All 3 men he shot are white. His defense attorney and the prosecutor are white. The trial judge is white. Only Rosenbaum is recorded as having used the N-word that night during what was billed as a BLM protest for racial justice. Under Wisconsin law, the issue comes down to self-defense. Did Rittenhouse fire his AR-15 because he believed with reason that he might suffer death or serious bodily harm if he did not, bodily harm rather, or did he provoke the rioters into attacking him so he could run up a body count as the prosecution alleges? Shooting the individual who put the loaded pistol in Rittenhouse's face was surely self-defense. And according to testimony, Rosenbaum and Huber both tried to grab the barrel of the AR-15 to pull it away, in which case Rittenhouse would have been at their mercy and possibly dead. The judges expanded the range of charges of which Rittenhouse may be convicted, giving the jury a menu of lesser charges if they do not believe that Rittenhouse was guilty of intentional homicide. The prosecution has described Rittenhouse as an active shooter, calling to mind the Las Vegas gunman who massacred dozens of people at a music concert by firing from his hotel room. But a 17-year-old running from a mob and shooting while sitting on the ground and being attacked scarcely fits the description of an active shooter. Pat Buchanan concludes, Kyle Rittenhouse used his rifle to protect someone else's property and his own life. He was both righteous and in the right. They were in the wrong. And let's go to the chat. Scroll up to the top. Hello to Con Tiki Roulette. Joy to the fishes in the deep blue sea. Joy to you and me. Do you know that Hoyt Axton wrote that song? Kind of out of character for him. He played the father in Gremlins. He also wrote that Steppenwolf song, The Pusher. Red Sulfur, hello. He says, it was gut-wrenching to hear and see the verdict being read. Mom and sisters were in agony. Mom looked heavenward. Many eyes were moist. Hello to Emmett Kelly's Earth and to Ann Run, who says, hello all. So happy to have been wrong on the hung jury. God bless the kid. Chokin666 has one giant leap for Kyle, one small step for Kyle Kind. Hello to Dan. Bombcasso88. Red Sulfur says the witches at CNN looked grim. Let's see. Dan says Freedom Friday for Kyle. Hello to William Hicks. Chokin666 says, hope he sues lots of people and institutions. Palpcasso88 says, press 1 if you're going to miss Kevin's hotel room once he gets new digs. Well, it seems almost certain I'm going to be here for another Christmas. Yeah. Because, there's no point in looking for an apartment or a shared apartment until the disbursement comes through, and I don't know when that's going to be. So, but no, my brother was asking me about this, about, your fond memories of this hotel room in which I've been here for now 11 months and 2 days. I told him I'm going to forget it faster than you would believe. I have a talent for that, of putting behind me unpleasant episodes in my life. Hello to Sam B. Yes, Joke666. State lines were crossed. Hello to Kontiki Roulette. William Hicks says, all it takes is a couple of dumpster fires or flaming cars. The peaceful protesters can warm up. Oh, yes, Kenosha tonight. I saw something, perhaps you saw it, of a black woman with cornrows or extensions who started shouting, I am a monument. She was clearly distraught. She was in front of the courthouse. And then she collapsed to she kept moaning and screaming. It was difficult to understand, impossible to understand what she was saying, except she said twice, I am a monument, whatever that means. And then she collapsed to the ground and appeared to have a seizure. Let's see. Who else? Jim Smith says, I heard that the gun used was stored at his father's house in Kenosha. Yes, it was stored in Kenosha. No question. Don Willis says, never apologize for being an armed white man. Emmett Kelly-Zer said, turbulence. It was a windy day in Kenosha. If there'd been any more turbulence, the arson fires would have burned the whole town down. Kontiki Roulette says, this clearly shows what their agenda is, and it's not based on God's law or natural law. It's a complete subversion of both laws. Oscar Toe, hello, says, I will relish this while eating Thanksgiving dinner. Hello to Seven Costanza, who calls this a white pill. Dan Allison says, I love it when the mask drops and the hate is obvious for all to see. Anran asks, how many cheeseburgers will Kraus eat tonight? Over under of 7. Respectable commenting name says, good evening, KMG. Chat, Kyle's free, and Kenosha might even get what it deserves for charging him and taking 4 days to do the right thing. William Mick says, what in the hell does Gavin Newsom have to say about the Rittenhouse trial? Apparently there aren't enough problems for him to solve in California. Dan says, don't forget about Ghislaine Maxwell today as well. And, okay, it's not the verdict they're angry about, says Kontiki Relate. It's the loss of control using intimidation, threats, and slander. That is what is upsetting them. Hello to No Sleep Till Breezewood, PA, who says, never come down. Clown is too polite to describe de Blasio, says Ann Run. Jim Smith points out that 0 Republicans, including talk show hosts, are mentioning the Charlottesville trial, whose deliberations begin today. Dan Allison says, anyone who lives near state line and crosses it routinely knows that it's nothing. I'm thinking of Vancouver, Washington, and Portland, Oregon. Oh, yes, that trepidatious journey, to go from Oregon to Washington or Washington from Oregon. It's absurd. It's absurd. Chogokin66 says borders and why they're important now. What if you live near a state line? Seems like you'd probably be committing evil every day of your life, crossing it, says Oscar Toe. Indeed. Jim Smith says another reason to be thankful that LeVar Burton was passed over for Jeopardy host. Hello to Chad Chadson, our valiant moderator. Thank you for our service, who says the left can't create, so they use copy pasta. British American says LeVar Burton humiliated himself by begging for the Jeopardy job and then bombing at hosting when they finally felt sorry for him and gave him a shot. Contracu says the state lines attack is intentional if power shifts and the right goes on the attack. Hard to imagine now, but still possible. These rioters traveling from state to state are liable. Dan says, so many salty tears today. Glad I'm thirsty. Hello to Gamion, who says, so happy for Kyle and his mother. Okay. Wasn't the 1619 group also connected to pedos? Asked Dan Allison. I don't know about that. And yeah, but he crossed state lines. Hello to Professor Paul. Kak Today is a glorious day. The professor adds, God is with us, or God mit uns. Like a drinker writing a book called Drunk. Some real winners on the other side, says Dawn Willis. Hello to More, please. New name to me. Who ordered the assassination of Malcolm X? I don't know for real. Oh, let's say it's a prominent black religious man, leader in the United States, has been for 60 years or so. That fellow. He's musical as well. Plays the violin. Hello to Visionary Companion. And let's see. Hello to More, please. And Che Blutarski says David Brooks did his first wife a favor. She seemed pretty broken up by it. Anwar says, I might hate David Brooks more than Bill Kristol, and that is saying something. Hello to Texas Feral Hog. And Contracu says pseudo-seizures are not due to electrical activity in the brain and are common to those with serious psychiatric illnesses. KMG's 1% German DNA made an appearance again. I've never had 21andMe, is that what it's called? I've never had that done. I suppose there could be. No, there's not likely to be any German DNA at all because, it's Celtic on both sides of my family. And before that, Vikings, Normans. Chogokin 666. He types the name. Does this religious musical man also wear a bow tie? Asked William Hicks. Indeed. Look, ever since it happened, ever since Malcolm X was killed, everybody knew who was responsible. Everybody. Okay, moving on. Oh, yes. Facebook and Twitter silent on whether Kyle Rittenhouse support is still banned. And I'm looking at the uncanny valley face of Mr. Facehouse. Mr. Facebook there. I'm sorry, I'm discombobulated because this is not a human face that I'm looking at here. And there is Jack Dorsey, who, of course, has decided to make himself look like a Dostoevsky villain for some reason. This is from Alan Bakari at Breitbart. Big tech companies continued to censor statements of support for Rittenhouse, even as the prosecution's case fell apart. Users on Twitter also report that the platform is still suspending them for supporting Rittenhouse. Breitbart News reached out to both Facebook and Twitter to inquire if their bans on support for Rittenhouse are still active in light of the verdict, and asking if their platform's rules make a distinction between support for violence and support for legal self-defense. Thus far, neither company has responded. GoFundMe, the fundraising platform that banned fundraisers in support of Rittenhouse shortly after the Kenosha riot, did make a statement saying that fundraisers in support of Rittenhouse would be allowed in light of the teenager's acquittal, and said they only banned fundraisers after charges for violent crime were brought against him. Yeah, sure. Okay. And, oh, yes, the Lügenpresse. Again, this is from Breitbart. Jack Montgomery, The Independent, falsely claimed that Kyle Rittenhouse shot 3 black men with rifle after he was cleared. The legacy British news outlet, which no longer publishes a print edition but retains an online audience and influence in the UK media and political sphere, led with full story teenager who shot 3 black men with rifle found not guilty on all charges as the top subheadline of its front page coverage of the verdict. The Independent is not the first high-profile organization or individual to make erroneous claims about the night Rittenhouse, then age 17, exercised his right to lawful self-defense, with no less a person than now President Joe Biden having intimated without any evidence that the teenager was a white supremacist to a mass audience. How is it that someone as old as Joe Biden, who was first elected to the U.S. Senate in 1972, gets so woke? How does that happen? This is a man who regularly uses the word Negro, but he's down with the white supremacists being responsible for everything. More on the Lügenpresse. This is from Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. Media outlets in the UK are still describing the Liverpool suicide bomber as a Christian convert, despite clear evidence that he faked this identity in an effort to bolster his asylum claim. 32-year-old Imad al-Sualmin, a refugee who was born in Iraq, was killed when his homemade bomb detonated in a taxi while he was on his way to carry out the attack. The intended target was either a Remembrance Sunday parade or a women's hospital, outside of which the device prematurely exploded. Immediately after his identity was made public, the media hyped reports that al-Sualmin was not an Islamic terrorist, but in fact a Christian convert. Outlets like BBC News are still reporting this falsehood today, with a new report about the details behind the attack labeling the terrorist a Christian convert. It's simply not true. Imad al-Sualmin began planning his attack at least 8 months ago. During this time, when he was constructing the bomb, he was seen at his local mosque every day during Ramadan in April. According to The Telegraph, the terrorist attended the mosque all day, every day during the religious festival, and was seen praying with a fellow Muslim a week before the attack. Speculation is still raging as to the target, perhaps a Remembrance Day parade that was taking place at a nearby cathedral. What kind of Christian convert, Paul Joseph Watson asks, prays in a mosque and then goes on to try to blow himself up outside a Christian cathedral? Outlets like the BBC are still amplifying the Christian convert myth, despite it now being widely known that Muslims in huge numbers have been attending 5-week courses at Liverpool Cathedral, not because they genuinely want to convert, but because it helps get their asylum claim accepted. Mohammed Ejdadarian, a genuine convert, told The Telegraph that there are countless people who are abusing the system. I do understand there are a lot of mixed motives. There are many people abusing the system, and I'm not ashamed of saying that, he acknowledged. Despite it being painfully obvious that this is precisely what al-Sualmin was doing, and that he was never actually a Christian convert, is apparently lost on the mainstream media, which continue to completely ignore the terrorists' actual motives and behavior. It's almost like they hate Christians and Christianity in general. Surely not. Let's see what Jim Kunstler has to say today. His column is called Onward into Darkness. Tripping over the door sill into Joe Biden's dark winter, what do you see out in the gathering gloom? That old shining city on a hill is looking more like Detroit in a sleet storm, with dumpster fires sputtering here and there in the broken streets. The darkness descending is something more ominous than any ordinary night. In the shadows, an insectile legion seems to be stealing away with what remains of your country. Was it reassuring to see Dr. Anthony Fauci declare on MSNBC, quote, "What we're starting to see now is an uptick in hospitalizations among people who have been fully vaccinated but not boosted," unquote. And the moral of that story? Get more of the same thing that's not deleted. And if you don't volunteer to get it, maybe we can find a way to force you. How does this lying prick get to remain as America's chief public health officer? Everything your government tells you these days is a lie, the old epigram goes, including and the. Actually, that was what Mary McCarthy, the novelist, said about Lillian Hellman, the playwright and professional creep. Yes, that she said everything Lillian Hellman writes is a lie, including and the, which led to a defamation suit. And sadly, Lillian Hellman died before the suit could go to trial. Sad, sad, sad. The chief victims of that inexhaustible deceit is America's rule of law. Case in point, the shenanigans in the D.C. District Federal Court last week in the action known as Page v. Comey et al., basically the whole FBI and DOJ. This is Carter Page's lawsuit over the phony FISA court warrants sworn against him in the attempt to use the 3-hop rule to surveil everybody in the 2016 Trump campaign and defame Page in the process. A judge named Rudy Contreras, who happens to be the current presiding judge of the FISA court, also happens to be the D.C. District's chair of the Calendar and Case Management Committee, meaning he gets to pick which D.C. judge will sit for Page v. Comey. Rudy picked Judge James Boasberg. Judge Boasberg sat on the very FISA court that approved the Russiagate warrants. He also presided over the trial of FBI lawyer Kevin Kleinsmith, convicted of altering documents to conceal Carter Page's prior service to the CIA. Say what? Boasberg is supposed to adjudicate matters around the very proceedings he was involved in? Rudy Contreras was the judge who accepted General Michael Flynn's 2017 guilty plea for speaking with the Russian ambassador in his capacity as designated national security advisor to the president-elect, after acting FBI Director Andrew McCabe threatened criminal referrals against General Flynn's son on a confabulated Foreign Agents Registration Act rap. Rudy Contreras also happened to be a boon companion of FBI officer Peter Strzok, who headed the phony baloney Crossfire Hurricane counter-intel operation based on the Hillary Clinton-sponsored Steele dossier. Judge Contreras coordinated FISA court filings with Strzok, making him party to a seditious conspiracy to disable the chief executive, a matter currently being reviewed by special counsel John Durham. Notice how all these people are still in office and still involved in the various cases they played roles in. Anyway, Judge Contreras' appointment of Boasberg sent up such an odium that he had to rescind it, replacing him with D.C. District Judge Timothy Kelly, who recused himself hours later, with the case then booted again to D.C. District Judge Dabney Friedrich, a Trump appointee. The lingering question: where is Chief Justice John Roberts in this farce? Justice Roberts is supposed to be the ultimate supervisor of the federal court system, and especially these parts of it, the D.C. District and the FISC. Does he really want it to look this bad, like a poor imitation of the Soviet Russian courts in the 1930s? Jim Kunstler continues, Attorney General Merrick Garland apparently wants to go full Soviet at the end of his justice system. Earlier this month, he told the Senate Judiciary Committee that the DOJ would not use counterterrorism statutes to target disgruntled parents in school board meetings as domestic terrorists. Then a DOJ whistleblower produced internal department emails showing that the DOJ and the FBI did exactly that. Where's the contempt citation against AG Garland? Next was the FBI's invasion of Project Veritas chief James O'Keefe's home in a case involving Joe Biden's daughter Ashley Biden's personal diary, which Project Veritas was alleged to be holding, which supposedly contained some entries about sketchy father and daughter showers together. Bad optics for a floundering president already suspected of being a bit free with his touch, shall we say, around the little ones, not to mention the florid pornographic exploits self-documented by son Hunter. Instead of defending O'Keefe's First Amendment rights, the legacy news media piled on him as not a real journalist. More to the point, though, within hours of the FBI confiscating O'Keefe's cell phones and other devices, O'Keefe's private communications with his attorneys turned up in the hands of the New York Times, which published some of the material. Of course, James O'Keefe is in the middle of a defamation lawsuit against the New York Times. And wasn't it a fortuitous coincidence that the newspaper came into possession of their adversaries' privileged information? The thing is, of course, that the info could have only been provided to the Times by one possible source, the FBI, the investigative arm of the DOJ. Days later, Judge Annalisa Torres from the Southern District of New York ordered the FBI to stop extracting data from the phones, as if they hadn't already downloaded every shred and made a zillion copies. Where is the DOJ Inspector General Michael Horowitz? Where is the DOJ's ethics office? Why has the leaker not been outed and arraigned? Why? Kunstler concludes, because we are deeper into the age of anything goes and nothing matters. Every institution in American life is failing. The people are finally starting to see how this works at the same time that they see how the vaccines work. It did not have to be, but we allowed it to get this far, and now so many things are broken that there is barely any honorable and effective authority left. As the long night falls over the land, we survey the terrain and see fiery eruptions on the horizon. Is that the flashing of chaos in the distance? In the darkness, it's hard to tell how close it may be. Ashley Biden. Ashley. Yeah. Well, her name gets even better, okay? She is the sole child of the union of Joe Biden and Dr. Jill. Her full name is Ashley Blazer Biden. Ashley Blazer. So I guess it was Jill who picked up this name. You see, there are a lot of people out there who think they are sophisticates, cosmopolitans, but they are not. No sophisticate, no cosmopolitan would ever choose to call their daughter Ashley Blazer Biden. And this came up on 30 Rock once. What are good names for children? Kings and queens of England. Those are good names. Yeah, those are all solid names. I guess you have to start from, the Norman Conquest, because you don't want to go into those Saxon names like Ethelred and the like. No, but all the others are good. Let's see. Let's run through some of them. I mean, even before the Normans, we have Harold, and we have Edward the Confessor. That's my confirmation name, by the way. Of course, he was half Norman. We have Harold, Edmund, but we William, Henry, Stephen, Richard, John. Let's see, what else? A lot of Henrys there, an awful lot of Henrys, and a lot of Edwards as well. Jane, Mary, Elizabeth, Charles. These are all good. And Anne. These are all great names. You cannot go wrong with any of those names. Ashley Blazer, indeed. It's just cringe. It's just cringe. You may have heard me speak of the great English satirist Peter Simple and his writings about the prejudometer available from all ethnic AIDS outlets, which if you point it at a person, it determines the level of racial prejudice that person would have. Of course, as he noted, there is a problem, say, when you're looking at if it's not just white people's prejudice, but two other, ethnic groups who hate each other. The problem is that the prejudometer has a tendency to overheat and explode. But we're getting there. This is from Che Quinn at the Daily Mail. A new trigger warning detector, which sounds alarms when it detects offensive speech, has been unveiled at Dubai Design Week, because no offensive speech ever comes from the Gulf. The Themis is a lamp-sized device intended to moderate debate in classrooms and universities and manifest political correctness. That's a quotation, manifest political correctness into a product. The small device could even be used to police language at dinner parties and family gatherings. Can hardly wait. How about you? And its developers have said that it hopes that Themis will encourage self-critique. Zina Issa, who unveiled the device in Dubai, told The Telegraph, through the use of speech recognition and sound sensors, we were able to program Themis to detect offensive terms, racial slurs, offensive jokes through the microphone. Extremely bothersome alarms last approximately 2 minutes, after which Themis turns off, allowing an open, understanding discussion among people on the possible trigger matter and the potential reasons behind Themis's activation. The device is named for Themis, the Greek goddess of justice and social order. Themis is currently being trialed in classrooms and universities with a view to a wider rollout soon. The design was unveiled at the Global Grad Show, where students from across the Middle East and North Africa were invited to share their work. Oh dear. What if, that whole Arab versus Berber thing? Yeah, North Africa is just a powder keg. The show, which takes place annually at Dubai Design Week Festival, was moved online this year due to the pandemic. Ain't technology grand? Oh, let's talk about David Brooks. The terrifying future of the American right. What I saw at the National Conservatism Conference by David Wright in The Atlantic. David Brooks is a contributing editor at The Atlantic and a columnist for the New York Times. He is the author of The Road to Character and Second Mountain, The Quest for a Moral Life. This is the same man who married a woman who is not Jewish. He is. He got her to convert and got her to change her name and then unceremoniously dumped her, when she was, in her 40s or 50s, for his research assistant. But he is the author of The Road to Character and The Second Mountain, The Quest for a Moral Life. And he begins talking about Rachel Bovard, and she was an establishment conservative, but no longer. She said at this conference in her speech, woke elites, increasingly the mainstream left of this country, do not want what we want. This was at the National Conservatism Conference in Orlando. What they want is to destroy us. Not only will they use every power at their disposal to achieve their goal, but they've already been doing it for years by dominating every cultural, intellectual, and political institution. Yeah, but where's the lie, David? As she says this, the dozens of young people in her breakout session begin to vibrate in their seats. Ripples of head nodding are visible from where I sit in the back. These are the rising talents of the right, the Heritage Foundation junior staff, the Ivy League grads, the intellectual Catholics, and the Orthodox Jews who've been studying Hobbes into Tocqueville at the various young conservative fellowship programs that stretch along Acela land. In the hallway before watching Bovard's speech, I bumped into one of my former Yale students who is now at McKinsey. Bovard has the place rocking, training her sights on the true enemies, the left-wing elite, a, quote, totalitarian cult of billionaires and bureaucrats of privilege perpetuated by bullying, empowered by the most sophisticated surveillance and communications technologies in history, and limited only by the scruples of people who arrest rape victims' fathers, declare math to be white supremacist, financed ethnic cleansing in Western China, and who partied a mile high on Jeffrey Epstein's Lolita Express, unquote. This is outstanding. The atmosphere is electric, Brooks writes. She is giving the best synopsis of national conservatism I've heard at the conference. Progressives pretend to be the oppressed ones, she tells the crowd, but in reality, it's just an old boys club, another frat house for entitled rich kids contrived to perpetuate their unearned privilege. It's skull and bones for gender studies majors. Again, outstanding. She finishes to a rousing ovation. People leap to their feet. Brooks comments, I have the sinking feeling that the thunderous sound I'm hearing is the future of the Republican Party. So he didn't get heckled. He worried about that he would be heckled. subject to verbal abuse, but everyone was charming, he said. As one young man told me late one night, we'd like to dislike Bill Kristol, but he got us all jobs. I'm sure that really happened. The movement has three distinctive strains. First, the people over 50 who have been hanging around conservative circles for decades, but have recently been radicalized by the current left. Chris DeMuth, 75, who was for many years president of the American Enterprise Institute, which used to be the Church of England of American conservatism, but now he's gone populist. Nat cons are conservatives who have been mugged by reality, he told the conference. 73-year-old Glenn Lurie, a Brown University economist, was a conservative, then a progressive. Now he's back on the right. What has happened to the public discourse about race has radicalized me. The second strain is made up of mid-career politicians and operatives who are learning to adapt to the age of populist rage. People like Ted Cruz, Princeton, Harvard, J.D. Vance, Yale Law, and Josh Hawley, Stanford and Yale. Yes, and Trump has an MBA from Wharton at the University of Pennsylvania. What is the point that they're trying to make? America has become relentlessly, ruthlessly credentialist, and you don't get very far without the proper credentials. So, Cruz and Vance and Hawley and even Donald Trump have them. And so what? Brooks continues, the third and largest strain is the young. They grew up in the era of Facebook and MSNBC and identity politics. They went to colleges smothered by progressive sermonizing, and they reacted by running in the other direction. I disagreed with 2/3 of what I heard at this conference, but I couldn't quite suppress the disturbing voice in my head saying, if you were 22, maybe you'd be here too. The national conservatives describe a world in which the corporate elite, the media elite, the political elite, and the academic elite have all coagulated into one axis of evil, dominating every institution and controlling the channels of thought. David Brooks knows very well that it is elites that rule the world and have always ruled the world, but he likes to pretend otherwise. At the heart of this blue oligarchy are the great masters of surveillance capitalism, the big tech czars who decide in secret what ideas get promoted, what stories get suppressed. The NatCon gospel includes great martyrdom stories, such as when Twitter and Facebook suppressed a New York Post story on Hunter Biden's laptop, and when various social media companies have tried to deplatform the Babylon Bee, the right-wing version of the Onion. Big tech is malevolent. Big tech is corrupt. Big tech is omnipresent, Ted Cruz roared. In the NatCon worldview, the profiteers of surveillance capitalism see all and control all. Its workers, indoctrinated at elite universities, use wokeness to buy off the left and to create a subservient, atomized, defenseless labor pool. Big business is not our ally, Marco Rubio argued. They are eager culture warriors who use the language of wokeness to cover free market capitalism. The entire phalanx of big business has gone hard left, Cruz said. We've seen big business, the Fortune 500, becoming the economic enforcers of the hard left. Name 5 Fortune 500 CEOs who were even remotely right of center. Oh, so where's the lie, David Brooks? The idea that the left controls absolutely everything from your smartphone to the money supply to your third graders curriculum explains the apocalyptic tone that was the dominating emotional register of this conference. Well, okay. Is the charge that was made true or not? And if it is true, does this not justify an apocalyptic tone? The politicians' speeches were like entries in the catastrophism Olympics. The left's ambition is to create a world beyond belonging, said Hawley. Their grand ambition is to deconstruct the United States of America. This is not new to David Brooks. Pat Buchanan and Sam Francis were saying this back in the 1990s. More on Sam Francis in just a bit. The left's attack is on America. The left hates America, said Cruz. It is the left that is trying to use culture as a tool to destroy America. We are confronted now by a systematic effort to dismantle our society, our traditions, our economy, and our way of life, said Rubio. Again, where's the lie? The first great project of the National Conservatives is to man the barricades in the culture war. These people have certainly done their homework when it comes to cultural Marxism, how the left has learned to dominate culture, and how the right now needs to copy their techniques. If I had to drink a shot every time some speaker cited Herbert Marcuse or Antonio Gramsci, I'd be dead of alcohol poisoning. Hawley delivered a classic culture war speech defending manhood and masculinity. The deconstruction of America depends on the deconstruction of American men. Listening to Hawley talk populist is like listening to a white progressive Upper West Sider in the 1970s trying to talk jive. The words are there, but he's trying so hard, it sounds ridiculous. David Brooks clearly doesn't think that masculinity is important. Another speaker, Amanda Milius, the daughter of John Milius, who was the screenwriter for the first two Dirty Harry films and Apocalypse Now. His work is actually much broader than that, but never mind. She grew up in LA and wound up in the Trump administration. Ooh, sounds suspicious. She argued that America needs to get back to making self-confident movies like The Searchers, the 1956 John Ford Western. This was an unapologetic movie, she asserted, about how Americans tamed the West and how Christian values got brought to a, quote, savage, undeveloped land, unquote. Brooks responds, this is about as dumb a reading of The Searchers as is possible to imagine. The movie is actually the modern analog to The Arestia by Aeschylus. The complex lead figure, played by John Wayne, is rendered barbaric and racist while fighting on behalf of westward pioneers. By the end, he is unfit to live in civilized society. Yeah, well, I've seen The Searchers many times, and it was only, National Review was leading the charge here? Oh, this ugly, ugly, racist movie. John Wayne is so angry at the Indians. Is there a reason why John Wayne might be angry with the Indians? How does David Brooks, when David Brooks travels to the Western United States, as I suspect he must, how did he think that the West was one? Does he ever give a thought to that? Oh, all of this bloodshed and harsh racial feelings. He continues, but we don't exactly live in an age that acknowledges nuance. Milius distorts the movie into a brave manifesto of anti-woke truths, and that sort of distortion has a lot of buyers among this crowd. The first interesting debate among the NatCons is philosophical. Should we fight to preserve the classical liberal order, or is it necessary to abandon it? Once again, all these so-called conservatives, hey, nobody here but us classical liberals. Some of the speakers at the conference were, in fact, classical liberals who believe in free speech, intellectual debate, and neutral government. Glenn Lurie gave an impassioned speech against cancel culture, the illiberal left, and the hyper-racialized group consciousness that divides people into opposing racial camps. Lurie asserted that as a black man, he is the proud inheritor of the great Western tradition. Quote, Tolstoy is mine, Dickens is mine, Milton, Marx, and Einstein are mine, unquote. He declared that his people are black, but also proudly American. Our Americanness is much more important than our blackness, he said, before adding, we must strive to transcend racial particularism and stress universality and commonality as Americans. Well, I like Glenn Lurie, and I was quite touched by what he had to say in his speech. But the fact is that Lurie is almost totally out of step with modern American blacks, who do put their blackness ahead of their Americanness. Others, Brooks continues, argue that this sort of liberalism is a luxury we cannot afford. The country is under assault from a Marxist oligarchy that wants to impose its own pseudo-religious doctrine. Again, where's the lie? David Brooks. Yoram Hazony, the chief intellectual architect of national conservatism, is an Orthodox Jew who went to Princeton before moving to Israel. It's interesting. I mean, I've read his work and I've read interviews with him. Why did he said, of Jews in America, if the celebration of Christmas offends you, then you should leave. And he said, that's what I did. Hazony did not want to live in a Christian country, so he moved to Israel. Hazony argues that you can't have a society that embraces government neutrality and tries to relegate values to the private sphere. The public realm eventually eviscerates private values, especially when public communication is controlled by a small oligarchic elite. If conservatives want to stand up to the pseudo-religion of wokeism, they have to put traditional religion at the center of their political project. The history of Judaism demonstrates, according to Ophir Haivri, that you don't need a state or a political order to be a nation. The problem in America, Zoni continued, is that alphabet people activists today, like American Jews in the 1950s, are trying to expel Christianity from the public square. This threatens to render the public square spiritually naked. The naked public square was a term that was devised by Richard John Newhouse at First Things magazine. And again, these arguments go back to the 1990s, and David Brooks knows this well, but he's pretending, oh, something, wicked this way comes, and has just come recently. Does he ever get tired of lying? Another interesting debate among the NatCons is political and economic. Conservatives have lately become expert culture warriors, the whole Tucker Carlson shtick. This shtick demands that you ignore the actual suffering of the world. The transgender kid alone in some suburban high school, the anxiety of a guy who can't afford health care for his brother, the struggle of a Black man trying to be seen and recognized as a full human being. Amazing stuff. Amazing. Who are these Black people in the United States who believe that they are not seen and recognized as full human beings? David Brooks, does his heart really bleed for the transgender kid alone in some suburban high school? First of all, they're not alone. They have one of the most powerful pressure groups in America, and they have many, many allies in, I would say, pretty much every school in America, whether it's in the cities or the suburbs. Again, David Brooks knows this, but he pretends otherwise. My friend Rod Dreher of the American Conservative, Brooks continues, argue that because the left controls the commanding heights of the culture and the economy, the only institution the right has a shot at influencing is the state. In these circumstances, the right has to use state power to promote its values. We need to quit being satisfied with owning the libs and save our country. Dreher said, we need to unapologetically embrace the use of state power. This is where Viktor Orban comes in. It was Dreher who promoted Carlson's controversial trip to Hungary last summer, and Hungarians were a strong presence at the National Conservative Conference. Oh dear, the Hungarians are here. Our team talks incessantly about how horrible wokeness is. Dreher said Orban actually does something about it. Brooks he's worrying hard. This is National Conservative pursuit to its logical conclusion, using state power to break up and humble the big corporations and to push back against coastal cultural values. The culture war merges with the economic class war, and a new right emerges in which an intellectual cadre, the National Conservatives, rallies the proletarian masses against the cultural corporate elites. All your grandparents' political categories get scrambled along the way. Oh, you mean this is completely different from the way in which Conservatism, Inc., an intellectual cadre, rallied the proletarian masses. They were swindling them, but again, David Brooks knows he knows all this, but he pretends otherwise. Oh, the NatCons are wrong to think there is a unified thing called the left that hates America. This is just the apocalyptic menace many of them had to invent in order to justify their decision to vote for Donald Trump. Oh, so when it is now accepted amongst the elites, the 1619 Project, that America was founded on evil. Ooh, nothing apocalyptic about that. Drag Queen Story Hour. Nothing apocalyptic about that. White students in elementary school, in secondary, middle school, in high school, in the university, being forced to read statements condemning themselves for their skin color. Nothing apocalyptic about that, eh, David Brooks? They are wrong, too, to think there is a wokest Anschluss taking over the institutions of American life. For people who spend so much time railing about the evils of social media, they sure seem to spend an awful lot of their lives on Twitter. 90% of their discourse is about the discourse. Anecdotalism was also rampant at the conference, generalizing from 3 anecdotes of people who got canceled to conclude that all of American life is a woke hellscape. They need to get out more. This is the most unselfconsciously ridiculous thing that I've heard from Conservatism, Inc. for quite some time. Oh, they need to get out more. Oh, so what? 3 people were canceled in America, whatever. This goes on every single day. Once again, he knows it. David Brooks knows it. Finally, there's something extremely off-putting about the NatCon public pose. In person, as I say, I find many of them charming, warm, and friendly, but their public posture is dominated by the psychology of threat and menace. And of course, that's never been employed in American politics before. Never. Franklin Delano Roosevelt certainly never used the psychology of threat and menace, did he? If there was one expression of sympathy, kindness, or grace uttered from the podium in Orlando, I did not hear it. But I did hear callousness, invocations of combat, and whiffs of brutality. Yeah, they need to get out more. This is too funny. Here we go. Here's how he concludes. Sitting in an Orlando hotel, I found myself thinking of what I was seeing as some kind of a new theme park, a NatCon world, a hermetically sealed dystopian universe with its own confected thrills and chills, its own illiberal rides. I tried to console myself by noting that this NatCon theme park is the brainchild of a few isolated intellectuals with a screwy view of American politics and history. But the disconcerting reality is that America's rarefied NatCon world is just one piece of a larger illiberal populist revolt that is strong and rising. A few isolated intellectuals. Well, let's talk about David Brooks's people. By that I mean the neoconservatives. Neoconservatism was never a political movement. Never. What was neoconservatism? Let's say 500 or so. Op-ed writers, columnists, and think tank spivs. That was it. They never had any boots on the ground. Anti-abortionists, boots on the ground. Second Amendment people, boots on the ground. Neoconservatives, nothing. Zero. Yet somehow they managed to suborn the Reagan administration and nearly destroyed it with Iran-Contra. They managed to suborn the Bush administration. They managed to suborn the second Bush administrations, pushing these ridiculous wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. How does a group with no political base manage to suborn all those administrations? I wondered about this for years. Is it compromat, as the Russians say? Do they have, blackmail-worthy material on Republicans? Yes, David Brooks accusing other people of being out of touch. Yeah, that's absolutely hilarious. His time is gone. Sam Francis. I learned an enormous amount from Sam Francis, who died far too soon. And now, of course, for some reason, people are beating up on Sam Francis, who died some years ago. Paul Gottfried writes in Chronicles, open season has been declared on the late and longtime Chronicles columnist Samuel Francis. Evidence can be found in, among other places, a diatribe recently published by political journalist Michael Lind in Tablet, The Importance of James Burnham. Lind started his essay by analyzing Burnham, but then segued into unkind remarks about Burnham's chief exponent, Francis. He was bothered, he says, by the way Francis casually referred to himself in conversation as a fascist. But allow me to move from 1988, where Lind places this incident, to an earlier discussion at my home in Bethesda, Maryland, in 1987 between Francis and Lind, both of whom had been invited for a cookout. There, as our two guests engaged in friendly banter in the living room, Francis described himself jokingly as a fascist, and Lind responded with an amiable smile. There was no indication that he took umbrage, and the two left together from all appearances as friends. Indeed, from Lind's remarks, it would seem that they saw each other again. Pache Lind, as a longtime friend of Francis, I don't remember him teeing off in Hispanics, and I doubt that he was doing anything but joking or trying to get Lind's goat in this exchange that supposedly took place at their get-together in 1988. When the subject of immigration came up, I pointed out that Mexican Americans were assimilating and intermarrying at the same rate as European immigrants had in the past, so that there might be economic consequences of unskilled immigration for Latin America, it was not a threat to the continuity of American culture. Francis glowered and said emphatically, "They are not our race," unquote. Gottfried continues, although Francis notoriously wrote on the American historic nation and bewailed immigration from the Third World, from the many hours I spent with him, I don't recollect his views on Hispanic Americans. He may have offered them elsewhere, but never in my presence. But even if Francis has said something approaching what Lind ascribed to him and did so with conviction, why should I give it special attention? Is this the worst expression of racism we're encountering? What about professors today giving speeches at Yale or Duquesne, calling for the disappearance or execution of the hated white race, or urging American whites to commit collective suicide? Why must Lind and other self-described conservative authors like Matthew Rose treat Francis abusively by misrepresenting positions on religion, culture, and race? Rose may be trying to justify a stereotype rather than exploring Francis's work independently of received opinions. The question we must ask ourselves is why? I noticed that in an otherwise generous review of my new book on anti-fascism in the Washington Examiner, the reviewer did not object to my respect for Herbert Marcuse as a social critic, but he was upset that I had kept unsavory friends like the brilliant essayist Sam Francis. Why exactly should a reviewer in what presents itself as a conservative newspaper be more offended by my relation to Francis than my expression of indebtedness to a far leftist, indeed someone who shamelessly rationalized the Soviet oppression of Eastern Europeans? The attacks on Francis have become increasingly ritualized. Such activity allows those who are trying to avoid cootie contamination to distance themselves from the so-called radical right. After all, respectable conservatives are just trying to dialogue with nice leftists, the kind who appear on Fox News to engage in clumsily contrived debates. A bolder right is not welcome in these theatrics. The far or radical right is only dragged out of limbo to be periodically excoriated, which may help explain the intermittent denigrations of Francis. Conservatives, preoccupied with the intellectual scarecrow of white racism rather than the concrete reality of anti-white racism promoted by our state, educational system, and media, are misguided. From all accounts, this supposed raging racist got along well with the blacks all around him, and he died in a nearby hospital, nearby to Seabrook, Maryland, used largely by blacks. And my friend Tom Piatek has another piece in Chronicles on San Francis, defaming the dead, and this is about Matthew Rose's piece in First Things. After Rose's first attack on Francis, Piatek had hoped that Rose would consider the information I presented and use it to paint a more accurate picture of Francis. Instead, Rose turned that article into a chapter in his new book, A World After Liberalism, Philosophers of the Radical Right, which reinforces his old errors about Francis with new ones. The time has come to point out Rose's inaccuracies once again. Rose had claimed that Francis's published writings displayed no feeling for literature, art, music, philosophy, or theology, too little feeling for these disciplines. However, as I pointed out 2 years ago, far from being indifferent to art, Sam produced it himself, if literary criticism counts as art, as shown by his essays on the film The Godfather and the fiction of H.P. Lovecraft, which I count as two of the finest studies of film and literature chronicles as published in his long and illustrious history. There's that Rose makes the claim that Francis was hostile to religion. Well, I know Francis's writing quite well, and I certainly never noticed a hostility to religion. I could point out that for all his supposed hostility to religion, on his deathbed, Sam Francis was received into the Roman Catholic Church. But here's what Sam Francis had to say about this: that the religious right was a failure. It would have done nothing absolutely to strip the federal government of the power it has seized throughout the century, restore a proper understanding and enforcement of the Constitution and Republican government, prevent the inundation of the country by anti-Western immigrants, stop the cultural and racial dispossession of the historic American people, or resist the absorption of the American nation into a multicultural and multiracialist globalist regime. And Francis was, you have all these people on the right being accused of wanting a theocracy. Francis apparently is now being berated for not wanting theocracy. Francis concluded an essay on the subject by calling for a movement to challenge the ruling class, and stated that it did not matter whether that movement was religious or not in focus. Indeed. This is such a cheap shot. Oh, that evil man, Sam Francis. What was so evil about him? You know, Dinesh D'Souza, that creep, was in trouble for some public remarks he'd made, and his defense was essentially, oh, yeah, okay, but over there, Sam Francis, talking about the Southern Baptists. The Southern Baptists had made a groveling apology for slavery, and Sam Francis merely pointed out that there is no condemnation of slavery in either the Old Testament or the New Testament, which apparently was one of the most shocking things anyone ever said. The fact that it is true is a no account. Boosters. Have you got your boosters yet? Step right up for your boosters. How many are we going to need? Let's look at the numbers from Ontario, Canada's most populous province. New cases, 793, up from 711 on Thursday, and a notable rise from 598 a week ago. Among the latest cases, 385 of the individuals are unvaccinated, 22 are partially vaccinated, 323 are fully vaccinated, and 63 have an unknown vaccination status. To date, over 88% of eligible Ontarians have received one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine, and 85% have received 2 doses and are considered fully vaccinated. And it's a weird thing that the number of the vaccinated continues to go up and up and up, and the number of cases continues to go up and up and up. Now, obviously, it would be crazy to see some sort of causal relationship there. I believe that we can only ascribe this to miasma. So someone called Dr. Catherine Smart tweets, "My son, 11-year-old, on his 3rd round of self-isolation from COVID school exposures, isn't taking any chances. Virtual school this week thanks to his amazing teacher. Let's do better for kids. Layer up the protection. Vaccine for 5 to 11-year-olds coming soon. Hashtag healthcare, hashtag Canadian Health, hashtag CDNPOLI." And there's a picture of this unfortunate, a youngster, and he appears to be protecting himself by wearing what seems to be a motorcycle helmet with a little thing there at the bottom there so he can be heard. Does he have a voice like this when he talks? Yeah. Okay, but here's the kicker. This daft bint, Catherine Smart, is the president of the Canadian Medical Association. And, this is just inexplicable, completely inexplicable. Paul Joseph Watson at Summit News. The Spectator has published an article citing official data from Public Health England. And Public Health England is not an NGO or whatever like that. This is the official organization for public health in England, which states for the over 30s, the rates of COVID infection per 100,000 are now higher among the vaxxed than the unvaxxed. The article, written by Lionel Shriver, is titled "The Absurd Theater of Vaccine Passports." It points out that according to official data, vaccines only offer about 17% protection for the over 50s. Shriver writes, "As I observed then, this would mean the vaxxed and the unvaxxed pose a comparable danger to each other All COVID apartheid schemes are therefore insensible. And more on this topic. This is from Legal Insurrection, Mary Chastain. White House tells businesses to move forward with COVID vaccine mandate after OSHA suspends it. So the fig leaf was that, no, this isn't the president of the United States exercising unconstitutional power. This is OSHA. Of course, a close reading or a not so close reading of the Constitution of the United States would reveal that the existence and the powers of agencies such as OSHA are grossly unconstitutional, but never mind that. And, facing surge, Austria will mandate COVID-19 shots. Mandate. This is from Emily Schultheis and Kirsten Grieshaber at Associated Press. While the scope of the proposed mandate was unclear, a blanket requirement would be the first for a Western country. Chancellor Alexander Schallenberg said those who didn't comply would likely be fined, but gave no other details. Sound familiar? Does it sound familiar to you? Yes, as I tweeted this morning. Hang on here. Let me bring it up. Yes. Impfstoff macht frei. That seems to be Austria's policy now. And let's see if there's anything in Substack written by a man with the initials AB. More proof that the mRNA COVID vaccines don't produce long-lasting something. If you like a functional T-cell response from your vaccines, Moderna and Pfizer may not be for you. The DNA vaccines might be better. This is researchers from Harvard. Okay, which that sounds pretty experty, doesn't it? It does to me. And Lockdown Skeptics, what's going on there? Or dailyskeptic.org, as it is now called. And, Galway University to use CCTV to locate unmasked students. Yeah, so Ireland has thrown off Catholicism and has adopted scientism as its new religion. The National University of Ireland in Galway has pledged to locate unmasked students on campus by using closed-circuit TV. Any students caught not wearing a face covering will be subjected to disciplinary action. New analysis of ONS, that's another official government, British government agency, finds the vaccine effectiveness against death has been overestimated and uncovers an alarming spike in COVID deaths post-vaccination. While cinema shut down after refusing to impose vaccine passports receives over £34,000 in donations in less than 24 hours. Yes, Austria. Oh, yes, they've got a picture of Jack Nicholson from the Cuckoo's Nest movie. Austria makes COVID vaccines mandatory. French doctors warn against vaccinating healthy children. And vaccine effectiveness remains negative in the 30 to 79-year-olds. Government data shows, despite boosters starting to kick in. And this is from the UK HSA Vaccine Surveillance Report. Where is this coming from? This miasma seems to be global and quite strong. It's a good piece by Luke Burgess on his site called The Cult of Experts. Faith and reason need not be the mimetic rivals our society have made them. And of course, I'm thinking about the madness of the last 2 years reading this. Dostoevsky saw the problem clearly. His protagonist, Raskolnikov, has a dream during a grave illness near the end of Crime and Punishment. Quote, he dreamt that the whole world was condemned to a terrible, new, strange plague that had come to Europe from the depths of Asia. Whole villages, whole towns, and peoples went mad from the infection. All were excited and did not understand one another. Each thought that he alone had the truth and was wretched looking at the others, beat himself on the breast, wept, and wrung his hands. They did not know how to judge and could not agree what to consider evil and what good. They did not know whom to blame, whom to justify. Unquote. The French social theorist René Girard saw the infection described as in Raskolnikov's dream, in which no medical symptoms are mentioned, as a virus that causes the breakdown of human relationships. Nobody can agree on who is to be trusted. Each is left to their own subjective form of rationality, which then becomes a weapon with which to attack others. There is no guiding logos. Girard wrote, having repudiated religion in order to be more rational, modern man comes full circle and in the name of superior rationality embraces a rational and technical form of irrationality. Burgess comments, Girard thought that the repudiation of religion in the name of reason inevitably leads modern man to become more religious than ever, but through a form of anarchic religion that justifies itself in ever more rationalistic ways. There are new rituals, for instance, but they are thought of as merely health precautions. Responses to pandemics like COVID-19 have included not only purification rituals, but also liturgies, including many forms, including press conferences and sacrifice. The mediators of reason, like high priests, determine the acceptable sacrifices, such as hospital restrictions that prevent people seeing loved ones in their final hours. In a world as complex as ours, no single person has access to all the knowledge they need to make the most informed decisions possible. So the experts tell us that we must rely on them for all things. They alone have access to the knowledge needed. And of course, as per YouTube requirements, I must tell you that the experts are always right, always right. And whatever the experts tell you, do it. Do it as hard as you can. Anyway, but back to Luke Burgess. René Girard, more importantly, saw that humans are fundamentally imitative creatures. We look outside of ourselves for models of behavior on which to patent our own. And he recognized that in a world in which there were no longer powerful shared models, transcendent models, like historical figures or leaders whom nearly everyone agrees are worthy of imitation, then smaller and smaller groups of people adopt their own models, often at odds with the models of other groups. And this eventually begins to threaten social cohesion. I'm going to be moving on to the book club shortly. Oh yes, but I have to talk about this. This is just absolutely appalling news. This is from Marie Wolf at National News Watch. Liberals, that would be the Liberal Party of Canada, which is the governing party federally, set to bring in tougher version of bill to ban conversion therapy. Nicholas Schiavo of the advocacy group No Conversion Canada says he's been told by government representatives that the new bill will leave less room for loopholes. Why is the government consulting with a trans activist? The coming proposed legislation would make it illegal to try to change someone's sexual orientation or gender identity through a discredited practice known as conversion therapy. A previous bill known as C6 would have made it a criminal offense to force adults to undergo conversion therapy without their consent, but it outlawed conversion therapy for children outright. The House of Commons passed the bill, but it didn't make it through the Senate before the latest election. Châtel Aubertin, a spokeswoman for Justice Minister David Lametti, said the government is committed to a complete ban on conversion therapy. Schiavo said his organization expects the new version of the bill to be stronger than the last and introduced within weeks of the new parliament starting. Our expectation, what we have heard, is that upcoming legislation will introduce a complete ban of conversion practices without any loopholes for age, gender identity, or faith. Bill C6 was heavily amended and opposed by half the Conservative caucus. It was strongly supported by other parties. Critics said it was flawed because consent to conversion therapy is invalid on the grounds that the practice does harm and is discredited. By whom, one wonders. Many young people who have consented to the practice do not understand what they are getting into, or do so under duress from family or faith leaders, said No Conversion Canada. Okay, among other things, when this bill passes, and if the Liberals want it, the NDP and the Bloc Québécois are certainly going to be on board. What this means is, let's look at some 10-year-old, a girl who decides that she's a boy. And the parents decide they are going to send their little girl to someone to talk about it. Psychiatrist, psychologist, therapist, counselor. That would be criminal. That would be a criminal offense. A criminal offense. So not only does in Canada is the sexual mutilation of children legal, it will now soon be a criminal offense for any counselor to suggest patience or a second thought to a 10-year-old who is thinking of taking male hormones, thus stunting permanently their physical and mental growth, and then even considering the grotesquerie of so-called top surgery. Monsters have seized my country. Abigail Shrier, a brave and admirable woman who is the author of Irreversible Damage, a book which is tremendously important and I cannot recommend highly enough, has on her Substack yesterday how activist teachers recruit kids. Leaked documents and audio from the California Teachers Association conference reveal efforts to subvert parents on gender identity and sexual orientation. Last month, the CTA held a conference advising teachers on best practices for subverting parents, conservative communities, and school principals on issues of gender identity and sexual orientation. Speakers went so far as to tout their surveillance of students' Google searches, internet activity, and hallway conversations in order to target sixth graders for personal invitations to alphabet people clubs, while actively concealing these clubs' membership rolls from participants' parents. Documents and audio files recently sent to me and authenticated by 3 conference participants permitted a rare insight into the CTA's sold-out event in Palm Springs, held October 29th to 31st. The 2021 Alphabet People Issues Conference Beyond the Binary, Identity and Imagining Possibilities provided best practices workshops that encourage teachers to have the courage to create a safe environment that fosters bravery to explore sexual orientation, which is a meaningless term, gender identity and expression, according to the précis of a talk given by 5th grade teacher C. Scott Miller. Several of the workshops advised teachers on the creation of middle school alphabet people clubs, commonly known as Gay Straight Alliance Clubs, or GSA, or as I like to call them, grooming academies. One workshop, Queering in the Middle, focused on what practices will work for successful middle school GSAs and children at this age developmentally. But what makes for a successful alphabet people middle school club? What to do about meddlesome parents who don't want their middle schoolers participating in such a club? What if parents ask a club leader point blank if their child is a member? Because we are not official, we have no club rosters, we have no records. Buena Vista middle school teacher and Alphabet People Club leader Lori Caldera states on an audio clip sent to me by a conference attendee. In fact, sometimes we don't really want to keep records because if parents get upset that the kids are coming, we're like, yeah, I don't know, maybe they came. You know, we would never want to get a kid in trouble for attending if their parents upset. This is a conspiracy. This is a genuine conspiracy. And, okay, I guess I was talking about Eric Zemmour earlier, and more news keeps coming out about him. I guess there's plenty of time to talk about him next week. I'm going to go to the book club, but let's go to the chat. What is CNP? Asked Jim Smith. I'm kind of afraid to find out the answer, actually. Most experts know that it's the early years, your upbringing, events that lead to the gay thingy, says Don Willis. One of the very strongest correlations certainly to boys becoming homosexuals, is a strong mother and a weak or absent father. You know, if you read biographies, I mean, hell, even if you read Wikipedia biographies, you just see this again and again and again. And it would appear that around 40% of adult male homosexuals self-report that they were sexually molested by older men when they were adolescents or pre-adolescents. Again, what is, Crime and Punishment. Crime and Punishment. Tell them I've gone to America, says Anran. That scene and line from C&P sent chills down my spine the first time I read it. You see that a lot in 19th century European literature. This idea that, you know, if the worst comes to the worst, you just go to America. Actually, you see it in 20th century European literature. Franz Kafka, who never was in America, wrote a novel. Well, he started a novel called America. Franz Kafka actually never finished any of his novels, but it's just the mystical allure of America. Well, if somehow I can get myself across the ocean, then my life begins again, and I'm free of all of the baggage of the old country. If you read about 19th century America, particularly 19th century America before the railroad, traveling any distances inland was an absolute nightmare. An absolute nightmare. Okay. Jim Smith says, I believe Kevin was reading earlier from Paul Gottfried at Chronicles, and that article would certainly contain some links. One day I'll work the word Raskolnikovian into a conversation, says Halper. Miasma is the name of our undoing, or it may be a general unbalance of the humors, said Emmett Kelly's Earth. It would be nice if we would learn screen sharing and the like, says David Wright. Okay. It would be nice if somebody would identify the point at which Mr. Grace names the articles he discusses. I'd like to go back and read them. I'm working on it, or I do it myself. That's Joel Gerke. I do typically name the articles at the beginning and the end. Jim Smith says, in pre-internet days, subscribing to Chronicles, I came to dub it the Sam and Joe report. That would be Joe Sobran, I guess. Don Willis says, so outrageous. Yes. Strong mother and weak or absent father. Yeah. Years ago, I was reading a biography of Edward Albee, the gay playwright, who went on to write a play about a man having a sexual love affair with a goat. The play was called The Goat, or Who is Sylvia? Yeah, let's just take a beloved Schubert song and just associate it with bestiality. And this play, the elite loved this play. I mean, it's a really fascinating discussion. Oh, just shut up. Oh, and Jeremy Irons played the lead, and other top actors played the lead. Well, anyway, going back to Edward Albee. Edward Albee, he was a scion of the Loew's theater empire. And I believe he had a stepfather. And this man was so terrified of his mother that he had been trained to tinkle a little bell before he ever entered a room that she was in. So, you know, she would have, no, don't come in here. Yeah. And yes, big surprise that Edward Albee became a homosexual. Okay. So let's go to the book club. And hang on, let me open something here. The book is by a fellow called Graham Thompson, and he describes himself as writing about music and literature. He has appeared in The Observer, New Statesman, The Guardian, Radio Times, The Word, Uncut, Telegraph, GQ, Time Out, many other outlets. He is the author of several books, including Under the Ivy, The Life and Music of Kate Bush. And he wrote biographies of George Harrison and of Phil Lynott of Thin Lizzy, and Small Hours, a biography of the great English singer-songwriter, guitar virtuoso John Martin. This book, which I believe was published in 2008, is called I Shot a Man in Reno, A History of Death by Murder, Suicide, Fire, Flood, Drugs, Disease, and General Misadventure as Related in Popular Song. In his introduction, he writes, death music is not merely a byword for bookish solemnity or the glorification of murder, drugs, and guns. Over the course of the last 100 years, this has also been about teenage girls weeping about their high school boyfriend's fatal car wreck, natural disasters sweeping whole communities away, the ever-evolving threat of disease, changing attitudes to old age, exhortations to suicide, the perfect playlist for a funeral, and the thorny question of what happens after the fat lady ceases to sing. Which means that for every Black Angel's death song, there is a candle in the wind, and for every cop killer, there is the living years. Death, like music, is a unifying force. There is something for every taste and inclination, from murderous vengeance to camp sentimentality and everything in between. Ask the gangster rap devotee. Ask the grizzled blues fanatic and the bearded folk fan. Ask the goth and the indie kid. Ask, and they will all tell you the same thing. Death and popular music have forever danced hand in hand in funereal waltz time. The pop charts and the majority of radio stations' playlists might conspire to convince anyone listening that the world spins on its axis to the tune of I Love You, You Love Me, and traditional matters of the heart. The rest of us know that we live in a world where red roses will one day become lilies and that death is the motor that drives the greatest and most exhilarating music of all. You know, it's funny, when I was reading the introduction to this book, and he's talking about a world in which people took the concerns of pop music seriously. And you've heard me say this before, but I think that this world has vanished, that it has vanished. One of the interviewees in the documentary, Edward Wright's documentary, The Sparks Brothers, which I just now seen, and I will talk about on Theater Thursday in some weeks to come, said that in today's pop music, there are just two subjects. One, I want to have sex with you. That's not the way she described it. I've toned it down for you. And two, don't bust up my party. Now, of course, that's hyperbole, but it is largely true. He continues, drawing upon original and unique interviews with artists such as Mick Jagger, Richard Thompson, Ice-T, Will Oldham, and Neil Finn, among many others. I Shot a Man in Reno explores how popular music deals with death and how it documents the changing reality of what death means when one grows older. I have to say from the outset that this book is quite well written. When one reads books about popular music, one becomes inured to how sloppy they are, both in thought and expression. This one isn't. And I'm always, these days, I'm taken aback when I run into a book that is well written, in a genre, set in a genre that one doesn't expect good writing. But, the author, Thompson, he talks about our understanding of death, on how children, it's just, death means nothing to them. Absolutely nothing. It's just, oh, yes, that this is something that apparently happens to you, like 80 years from now. And of course, children, if they're paying attention, will have heard of people who have died before their 80s, but I mean, this must be some sort of freak accident or the like. And then Thompson talks about the acceptance of death, I suppose after puberty and in adolescence. But he says, and I quite agree with him, that this is an intellectual acceptance. Then, when one gets into one's 20s, then there becomes the visceral understanding of death. That this is going to happen to everyone, including me. Could happen in 60 years, could happen today, and there's nothing I can do about it. The first chapter of this book talks about, well, if you're going to write a book about death in popular music, then you have to consider how death is treated today compared to how it was treated in the past. People live much longer today than they did in the past. I should qualify that. They live much longer on average than they did in the past. If you had survived, puerperal fever, or at birth, or any number of pandemics, or war, or the like, if you were a healthy man, that people were living into their 70s and 80s a long, long time ago, but they were the lucky ones. And now that it's expected that we are to live in our 80s, death becomes, one reverts to a kind of childlike view of death. This isn't really happening, is it? And surely, the Rand Corporation or whoever will invent some sort of minty salve that is going to cure death once and for all. I mean, I see that particularly in my own cohort, the boomers. They really seem to be persuaded that it's not going to happen to them. Thompson writes, the names and specifics change. The beats might become a little crisper, the words a little sharper, the context altered, the aims a little more sophisticated or not. But these songs form the bedrock of modern music's often faltering attempts to get to grips with mortality. It is possible to unearth unlikely connections. When Jimmy Rogers was dying of TB, he wrote My Time Ain't Long. When Warren Zevon was dying of lung cancer, he wrote the similarly unflinching Keep Me in Your Heart. The ailing Bill Monroe wrote his own elegy, My Last Days on Earth, on mandolin. When Freddie Mercury was dying of AIDS, he wrote the bombastically reflective The Show Must Go On, a kind of My Way decked out in singlet and mustache, which may not be to all taste, but at least displayed an unambiguous awareness of what was coming around the corner. And Thompson says in his book that this is not a book of lists. But of course, if you're writing a book of this type, it's going to have lists in it. And in the epilogue, we have the 100 best songs about death. Well, popular songs. There's a consideration of the British folk song John Barleycorn, which is it's rather ambiguous, isn't it? Because it describes the growth of cereal crops and their harvest, and being crushed by the miller in order to make bread and, well, brandy. But it's also about the life and death of people. Of course, these songs, and many of Nick Drake's songs, were rather similar in this respect. To write about the life cycle of nature is highly disconcerting to us, because nature dies every year and then is resurrected in spring. We die and we are not resurrected. Well, not on this earth, at any rate. He's got Stack o' Lee Blues by Mississippi John Hurt, Cab Calloway's St. James Infirmary, and oh, yes, you want to hear something gloomy? Gloomy Sunday by Billie Holiday, 1941. This is, I don't know, this is perhaps the most notorious of all popular death songs. Thompson writes, at a time when emo is being blamed for driving our teenagers headlong into the abyss, there is a certain delicious irony in the fact that the greatest, most velvety and seductive suicide song of them all falls well outside the remit of nasty old rock and roll. Gloomy Sunday, written in 1933 by the Hungarian songwriter Rejo Seres, is quite spectacularly morose in both tune and verse. Though there is precious little hard evidence to support the popular legend that the song directly inspired dozens of real-life suicides, the stories are persuasively colorful nonetheless, like the one about the Berliner who went home and shot himself in the head after hearing a show band playing the mournful melody, or the woman who hanged herself and left a copy of the sheet music to Gloomy Sunday lying in her apartment in lieu of a farewell note. Perhaps apocryphal, but food for thought, at least for those who cry sanction when a 17-year-old boy is found hanging in his parents' garage with Blink 182's Adam's song on repeat. Of course, when Ian Curtis was found hanged to death by his own hand, it was an Iggy Pop record, The Idiot, that was spinning around and round and round because it had got to the end. Like the composers of other notable suicide songs, such as All Apologies, Kurt Cobain, Without You, made famous in Harry Nilsson's 1971 version, but written by Badfinger's Pete Ham and Tom Evans. And if you want to get really depressed, you should read about the story of Pete Ham and Tom Evans and Without You, which was a deep cut on the Badfinger album, and Harry Nilsson and Richard Perry made it into this splendiferous thing, and it was number one everywhere in the world for weeks at a time. Decades later, it was number one everywhere in the world for weeks at a time when Mariah Carey covered it, and they didn't get to see the money because they had been cheated by their manager, and then it just gets worse and worse and worse, and both these men killed themselves. Others die in the summertime: the Manic Street Preachers, Richie Edwards, King's Crossing, Elliott Smith. Seres finally followed through under the threat implied in the song, jumping from his Budapest apartment window in 1968. Ironically, he was probably a much happier man back when he had written Gloomy Sunday, his depression partially the result of never having written anything as popular in the ensuing 35 years. Billy Mackenzie of the Associates, who recorded a version of the song in 1982, also killed himself in 1997. There are neat coincidences for the curse-hungry, but hardly anything more. The fact that the song was marketed as the Hungarian suicide song when it was first released in the United States would suggest that even then, there were people who were more than a little aware that death sells and were prepared to nudge the story forward a little. In any case, the song hardly needs any assistance in casting a deathly pall over the listener. The literal translation of Seres's original Hungarian lyrics reveals an almost apocalyptically grim worldview. The world has come to its end. Hope has ceased to have a meaning. Cities are being wiped out. Shrapnel is making music. Meadows are colored red with human blood. There are dead people on the streets everywhere. It is thoroughly depressing, but hardly fitting for any musical form outside of death metal. These jagged little lines were smoothed into something a little less crushing by Seres's compatriot, the poet Laszlo Javor. His version established the themes a little more clearly. The singer has lost his lover and, utterly bereft, is now preparing to join her in death. It makes the contemplation of suicide all the more explicit. The definitive English language translation following Billie Holiday's hugely popular 1941 recording, although Lewis took the precaution of adding a 4-line stanza at the end, suggesting that it had all been a dream. The song has since been sung by numerous performers, everyone from Mel Torme, Sarah Vaughan, and Ray Charles to Elvis Costello, Diamanda Gallis, Sinead O'Connor, Björk, and Candy Payne. Each of them has found something to identify with in this dark little dance with death. Folsom Prison Blues by Johnny Cash. Yeah. I've talked about this before. The Louvain brothers' Knoxville Girl. He says, Thompson says, it's still vaguely shocking. I find it more than a little vaguely shocking. Its plain depiction of brutal murder in the Appalachians in the 1800s and Ireland in the 1700s, well, you get the picture. It remains the archetype of the damsel dashed on the rocks murder ballad. And if the way Ira Louvain shrugs, sings, I took her by her golden curls and I drug her round and round, doesn't give you chills and spine shivers, then you're made of very strong stuff. It's suggested in Knoxville Girl, when the girl pleading for her life says she's not prepared to die, that she believes that she's been guilty of mortal sin because she's pregnant by the boy who kills her. But you see this a lot in murder ballads, that the killer just often seems to just flip out for reasons which are inexplicable. Ebony Eyes by the Everly Brothers, which was written by John D. Loudermilk, who of course also wrote the immortal Tobacco Road. Oh yes, Last Kiss by J. Frank Wilson. I grew up with this song, you know, and the 50s and 60s, you know, Leader of the Pack and all these songs, yes, which is also on the list. You know, Peter Blegvad, my favorite singer-songwriter, composed his own teenage car crash death song. It's, how would I put it, a little more existential than the norm. It's called A Driver's Seat. Peter Blegvad is criminally underrated. In any just society, he would be rich and famous. Strange Fruit by Nina Simone, which was covered by Susie and the Banshees. It's about a lynching. Painted Black by the Rolling Stones. Thompson says, this is the dream of swinging London flipped over into nightmare. The only swinging that's going on here is from the light fittings. The Black Angels Death Song by the Velvet Underground, which was based on, what was his name? Lou Reed's literature professor, the poet Delwood Schwartz at Syracuse University. Of course, you know, if you're interested in, you know, gloomy songs, you can't go wrong with the Velvet Underground. Although they wrote songs that were not about death. Bobby Gentry's 1967 song, Ode to Billy Joe. It's another song that I grew up with, and it was remarkable. It is something that you just don't see. This song came out, and it's a very strange song, and it's very ambiguous. Somebody died. You know, some young man died. You know, why? How? What reason? We don't know. And immediately, it seemed almost immediately, a cottage industry of explainers, you know, showed up. Oh, it's about, you know, again, you know, he thought he'd knocked up some girl or whatever, or that he was secretly homosexual and didn't want the world to know, just all manner, or that he was murdered, you know, all manner of explanations, because people were genuinely intrigued with a popular song. Thompson says of Traffic's version of John Barleycorn Must Die, a beautifully restrained and simply beautiful version of the touchstone British traditional song of birth, growth, death, and regeneration, arranged simply for acoustic guitar and flute. Steve Winwood's vocal floats on the top, pure and sweet as clear air. The sense of unhurried space allows the full pastoral majesty of both the melody and the message to shine through. Terry Jacks' Season in the Sun. Terry Jacks, of course, is a Vancouverite, as I was. And I just remember being enraged that this song, which I thought was, you know, perhaps the most insipid thing that I've ever heard in my life, was number one around the world. I really can't bear that song. Le Moribund was quickly and loosely translated into English by popular poet Rod McEwen. Again, you should look up Rod McEwen. In the middle 1960s, he was the most popular author in the world, and he is almost completely forgotten now. And if you look at anything that he's written, you just thought, you know, was there something in the water at the time? Were people taking stupid pills? Blue Oyster Cult, one of my very favorite bands, of course, is in there with Don't fear the Reaper, not as it is claimed a front page advertisement for a Romeo and Juliet style suicide pact, but rather an attempt to greet death with acceptance. Despite its heavy rock exterior, the song espouses a very old European view of dying. Death is literally depicted as a grim reaper, but is not to be feared. The line "Seasons don't fear the Reaper" plugs straight back into the age-old John Barleycorn idea of cycles of loss and regeneration. Buck Dharma, the songwriter, Donald Roser, his real name, said, "I felt that I achieved some kind of resonance with the psychology of people when I came up with that. I was actually kind of appalled when I first realized that some people were seeing it as an advertisement for suicide or something. That was not my intention at all." And, oh, yes, of course, the Smiths are going to be here. Asleep deep in the cell of my heart, I will feel so glad to go. And, oh, Cop Killer, Body Count, Dead Homies, Ice Cube, and, oh, 1952 Vincent Black Lightning by Richard Thompson. Of course, that is about a motorcycle, is it not? And we all know that motorcycles are dangerous, particularly to young men. Keep Me in Your Heart by Warren Zevon, previously mentioned. This is a really good book. I thought it would be good, because I'd seen reviews, but I was really surprised. I just barely scratched the surface of how good it is and how wide ranging it is. Thompson he's done his research. I didn't come across any stylisms in it. Typically, when I read books about popular music, they're full of stylisms. It's not just that Thompson has done the research, that he has thought about his subject, and he is a highly intelligent man, and his conclusions are often profound and certainly worthy of our consideration. Anyway, so those are my thoughts about Graham Thompson's I Shot a Man in Reno. Let's have a final look at the chat. Edward Richardson, hello. Reed said producers threw Velvet Underground demo tapes in the toilet, and the only reason they got recording contract was Andy Warhol. Added he felt great when he heard Valerie Solanas died in San Francisco. It's true enough, but actually it was Paul Morrissey that did the real work with regards to the Velvet Underground, being a band at all, getting gigs, all that stuff. Paul Morrissey was a filmmaker, and his films are pretty funny. And if you watch Paul Morrissey's films, now I got to caution you, they are pretty disgusting, but they're rigorously disinterested, much like Lou Reed's work with the Velvet Underground. And people are shocked when they find out that Morrissey is a far-right Catholic. But again, because you write about disgusting things doesn't mean that you were in favor of these disgusting things. John Denver, yay or nay? No, I could never bear him. Could never bear him. Of course, I'm always suspicious when, a man goes on publicly about his wife and how much he loves his wife. It's almost an iron law to me that when this happens, there's going to be some revelation of a scandalous affair, or the man is simply going to, divorce her for some reason or other. Charlie Freak by Steely Dan. That is one of the most chilling death songs that I have ever heard. On his tag, on his toe, a tag read DOA. Yes, Jack, I gave it back, the ring I could not own. Let's see. Even when I was 14, I knew that Rod McEwen was bad, says Visionary Companion. Don Willis says Lady Day was great. Endless Sleep by Jody Reynolds. Morbid Rockabilly, says Hauper. Are we Tallahatchie Bridge territory, said Don Willis? Yes. The real death songs are those you sing while dying on stage in live performance. I'm not really aware of singers dying in mid-performance, but you would probably be surprised to know how many conductors, classical conductors, have died while conducting on stage. There's quite a few. That's strenuous work. Enron says, go listen to some Erasure now. Rain and Snow by Aubrey Ramsey, about a man who kills his abusive wife, by Visionary Companion. How Persist is a song called Banks of the Ohio that sounds very similar to Knoxville Girl. Okay. Not much of a folkster, to each his own, says Don Willis. Who else do we have here? Richard Thompson's concerts are some of the best I've been to, says Hauper. I think he played your song once. That Elton John atrocity? No, I just, it's kind of shocking. You don't really expect Richard Thompson to play White Room by the Cream, but he does. Well, he was, what was it, 1,000 Years of English Music? He had this concert series. Maybe it wasn't 1,000 years. Going back to Summer Is a Comin' In. Visionary Companion says Traffic's version of John Barleycorn was a high point in rock music's maturation. Okay. There is or was a YouTube video of Thompson singing it on a show with Suzanne Vega and some others. The look on Vega's face when Thompson sang the lyric about having his tongue down a woman's throat. LOL, says Anran. Well, I am going to, John Denver was Oliver on the Brady Bunch TV show. Good one, Don Willis. Good one. It was 1,000 years, I'm pretty sure, says Halper. Well, thanks for that. Okay, so time to wrap it up for today and for the week. What is coming up on the show? Theater Thursday. Next week, Leo Carey's Great Romance from 1957, Affair to Remember, on December 2nd. Jay Mangold's film from 2019, Ford versus Ferrari. On December 9th, from 1946, Gillo Portocorvo's Capo. I sure choose a lot of grim movies, don't I? And on December 26th, for 3 weeks, I'm going to show movie or talk about movies which are associated with Christmas. It's a funny thing when you look into it. There are not very many movies at all made about the nativity itself. Strange, wouldn't you think? But on December the 16th, I'm going to be discussing Ernst Lubitsch's 1940 classic with Jimmy Stewart, The Shop Around the Corner. And on the book club next week, I'm going to be talking about drugs, about opioids, and about one family who ruined millions of Americans' lives. You know what family I'm talking about, the Sacklers. It's P.R. Kiff's Empire of Pain. On December 3rd, I'm going to be talking about Jacques Barzun's From Dawn to Decadence. On December 10th, I'm going to be discussing a novel, a little-known novel, which I love, by Teresa Waugh, who is the Oberon-Waugh's widow and a fine writer in her own right, called Waterloo, Waterloo. And on December 17th, I'm going to be talking about Amy Chua's Political Tribes. On Music Monday, next Monday, November 22nd, this is going to be fun. Disco Demolition Night, July 12th, 1979. On November 29th, I'm going to be talking about Marquis Smith and the Fall. December 6th, Kurt Weill, From Berlin to New York. December 13th, Let It Be. Already, there are now 3 different versions of the Beatles' worst album, Let It Be. The phrase polishing a turd comes to mind. But they're just determined to rescue this album. And the sad thing is that I suppose most people think that it was the Beatles' last album. No, Abbey Road was their last album. Let It Be was recorded before Abbey Road, and the sessions broke down amidst great acrimony, and various attempts were made to cobble together an album. Glyn Johns did it, twice, and it was rejected, so the tapes were handed over to Phil Spector. It's no good. But nope, they're just going to keep trying to persuade us that it is great. December the 20th, Bob Stanley, one of the founders of Saint Etienne, the world's most perfect pop group. I'm going to talk about his book, Yeah, 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 The Story of Modern Pop. So that's it for today and this week. excuse me, on the air Monday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. Thank you for the donations that I've received in recent days. I'm so grateful. If you would like to make a donation to this live stream, very much appreciated, particularly at this time. My PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once more, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you're in Canada, donations may be made directly to the live stream via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection to ease the burden. Good night.